All right, we should be going. And recording. Okay. Just as a check, so people attending, hopefully you can see the slides that we have.
I see a hand raised. I don't think we can unmute you, people in the chat. So if
Okay,
you could just
thumbs
do a
up.
thumbs up. Okay, good.
Good. Perfect.
Yeah, wonderful. I see another hand raised. Maybe that's supposed to be a thumbs up.
Yeah, I don't think we have the ability to unmute you, but you should be, oh good, you have access to the chat, and you should also have access to a Q&A box. That is where you can submit your questions to us, and we can answer them later on during the webinar. We prefer you use the Q&A box because it's easier for us to collate.
I started it. Can you see my submit questions here? Uh-oh, someone says he can't hear us. That's a problem. You might want to check on your end. Check how you have your audio settings set up. Can other people hear us okay? Can I speak louder? You need to turn up the volume on your computer. I'm not going to shout. I'm speaking. Oh, yeah. Other people can hear us just fine. Good, 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 good. So, right. You are anonymous as long as you don't use the chat. If you use the chat, I believe you might not be anonymous anymore. That's why we're asking you, please don't use the chat, use the Q&A box. But we'll see how that goes. I think we're going to go back and forth, Becky.
Yeah. Okay, we'll see how this goes. All right, well, it's 3:01. So Trish, did you want to start?
Sure.
You're leading this all,
Yeah.
so okay.
Okay, sure. Happy to start. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the NIH Director's New Innovator Award webinar. This is for RFA RM27-003. And my name is Patricia Lebowski, PhD, also known as Trish. And my partner, Becky Miller, also PhD, will be helping with all the Q&As. We're in the Office of the Director at NIH.
And I just realized I made a mistake. It's RFA RM27-002. I apologize.
Oh my goodness. That was just a test.
I will check that.
That was a test for everyone to see if you were in the right place. Oh my goodness, that's funny. 002. Right, so we're both in the Office of the Director at NIH, and anytime during this webinar, after we're done, etc., please look at our website. It's Common Fund, all one word, not Common Fund, commonfund.nih.gov/new innovator. If you have questions after the webinar that weren't addressed, or even if they were addressed and you don't understand and you want more clarity, you can email us at newinnovatораwards, plural, at mail.nih.gov. Okay. Now, I want to tell you just a tiny little bit about the NIH Common Fund that is supporting this program as well as other programs. The mission of the Common Fund is to support bold scientific programs that catalyze discovery across all of biomedical and behavioral research. Investigators and multiple NIH institutes, centers, and offices collaborate together. We have a working group that includes almost all of the NIH institutes and centers. They collaborate together on innovative research that's expected to address very high priority challenges for the NIH as a whole, and as a result, make a broader impact in the scientific community. And the graphic there, we have listed some of the requirements for these Common Fund programs. They have to be synergistic, transformative, they have to be novel. They're supposed to be catalytic, and that's why they're across all the different institutes and centers. And very importantly, they must be goal-driven. You can read more about these programs at commonfund.nih.gov. I didn't want to give you a whole list. There's, I don't know, 25 or 30 programs ongoing at any one time. There's always a few in development and a few that are spinning out, that are ending, excuse me. So on the next slide, but we're here to talk about one specific program within the NIH Common Fund, and that is the High Risk, High Reward Research Program. There's images there of the 4 different awards. We're going to talk about the second one, the New Innovator Award. But all 4 of these awards they're designed to be supporting scientists at all career stages, scientists that are proposing outstanding, high-risk, high-impact research. So think about that as you're thinking about your project and you're thinking about developing your application. All of these have annual funding opportunities. RM27-002 is the one we're talking about today with the New Innovator, and that's the one that you're thinking of applying to. All of them require and entertain high-risk, high-impact ideas, and they required no preliminary data or a detailed experimental plan. Those are not required for applications. This is very different than what you might be used to in other areas of the NIH. Any topic relevant to the entire NIH mission space is welcome. Okay, that includes behavioral research, social, biomedical, applied, formal scientists, and basic translational or clinical research, anything. And I guarantee you, if you send me a names page, which you don't need for this application, but if you send me a little paragraph or an abstract on your topic, I will tell you that if the topic is within the NIH mission space, it's fine. That's not the deal breaker when it comes to this award. Okay. We're encouraging applications from the full spectrum of eligible institutions. If you are doing research and your institution has the correct accreditation to submit NIH applications, then yes, please apply. Okay, so let's talk about the DP2, the Director's New Innovator Award. Again, this is part of the High Risk, High Reward Research Program. It's designed to support unusually creative, early career investigators that are proposing innovative, high-impact research. This was started back in 2007, so it's been around for quite a while now. It's a single PI application only. You cannot have multiple PIs. You must have early stage investigator status. What does that mean? That means you cannot have had a substantial NIH grant, and you must be within 10 years of your terminal, your doctoral degree, or your clinical training if that's relevant. In the application, you must commit 25% of your research effort to the project. The awards are capped at a budget of $475,000 per year for 5 years. Ask for that amount, no more, no less. Make sure you ask for 5 years. We use the DP2 activity code, also called a mechanism. So it's not an R01, an R01, it's a DP2, all right? Now, the DP2 application is different than an R01, all right? So always, the most important thing I can tell you is to read the funding opportunity. We know they are not that much fun to read. I assure you they're not that much fun to write either, let alone getting them published. But that's another story. So, but you must read them. They really do have important information in there. So anytime you're applying, you follow instructions in the SF424 application guide, unless there's something specific stated in the RFA, which for this, there are a lot of specific things stated that I'm going to go through here. But Google NIH SF424 and you'll get the application guide. It is long and it's not light reading. It's a resource, a reference source. So have that available to look up the various different parts that you need to complete the application. But again, if there are specific instructions in the RFA, those should be taken over the SF424, okay? So first of all, specific aims page. I already ruined the punchline on this. Don't include one. Do not use one. If you include it, it'll probably be removed. It will not be reviewed. So if you put something important in there, it's gone. Your reviewers don't see it. So follow instructions. The research strategy essay is different. It's an essay, and that's intentional. We really want you to think of it differently than the research strategy alone. It's an essay. It's 10 pages. It's not 12. An R01 is 12 pages. So it's shorter than that. It's 10 pages. This is the primary component of the application. We'll see a later slide for a little bit more information on that. The NIH biosketch, only the PI's biosketch is allowed. We cannot take a biosketch of people from your lab or collaborators or anyone else, only yours. It's a single PI application, and we really mean that. That's part of the reason for that requirement. For the bibliography and references cited, don't use it. Do not include it. If you're going to have references, and you probably should, you want to limit the number, and they would be essential ones that they will be listed in the essay within the 10-page limit of the essay. So you probably don't want to have 500 references. The budget, do not use. We don't want a detailed budget. There'll be more information in a minute. Equipment, do not use. Letters of support, do not use. All right, no letters of support allowed. So other components or forms in the application package, use them when they're appropriate. You want to include an authentication of key biological or chemical resources if it's appropriate. You want to include vertebrate animals, human subjects, biohazards, any of those that are appropriate to your project. They are not score driving. They won't hurt your score if you forget, but they do kind of hurt your score a little bit because reviewers say, why isn't this here? Oh, this person didn't know. They're using, I don't know, mice and didn't include vertebrate animals. That's odd. So if you need them, put them in there. All right. The next slide, budget information. So what you're going to do is you request $2,375,000 in total project funds on the SF424, the R&R form. However, no, that's the total for all 5 years. You don't need to put in any no detailed budget information is required. So don't put any details. You're going to hire this person. You're going to pay this much for animals. We don't need to see that. Do not use or submit a budget form. And I say this knowing that for many of you, your institution's going to require this information, and that's fine. They can require it. That way you have a good idea of how much money you need to do the work. It's very important to know that, but don't include it in the application to the NIH. The funds will be dispersed in annual increments of $475,000 per year for up to 5 years. If you only request 4 years, you might only get 4 years, but up to 5 years. So we used to fund this in multi-year funding increments, and we're no longer doing that. At least we're not planning to. So that's a big difference from years past. The other thing that is a big difference is that no cost extensions are allowed at the end of the 5-year project period. So the research strategy essay, this again is the meat of your proposal, okay? So we're going to give you these headings to use. So in 10 pages total, use the following headings or subsections, and we'll go through them one by one. First, the project science areas. 1-digit code and abbreviation, first the primary and then the secondary areas. There's a list of them that are in the funding opportunities and on our website. So you have to choose the ones that make the most sense for your project. Unfortunately, we're not actually allowed to help you do that. That's for you to decide. Those science areas are used only for review to identify the first round of reviewers. We'll get to that in a minute. The next subject heading is project description. This is, again, the meat of it, right? Describe the scientific importance of the topic. Describe the overall approach to be taken. Remember, preliminary data are not required, but they are accepted. We recommend you state clearly that in order to comply with the funding opportunity, a detailed and extensive experimental plan is not being provided. Put that sentence in there to remind reviewers that this is not, that this is a DP2 and it's not required. However, at the same time, you want to provide sufficient evidence that the proposal has been deeply considered by you and will be pursued in a robust and rigorous manner. Okay, you want to talk about controls. If you're using animals, you want to talk about sex as a biological variable, for example. So you must be rigorous in how you present the background information and also what you're going to do. The third subject heading is innovativeness. So provide an argument of why your proposal is exceptionally innovative. What's special here? What's the big leap forward that you're making that maybe no one's ever done before? Explain it. Don't let the reviewers come completely. They're going to come to their own conclusions, but help them along in that and tell them why it's innovative. The investigator qualifications. That's you, your qualifications. So support your claim of innovativeness in your prior research. What have you done before that was exceptionally creative or bold or innovative? Tell them about it. Next heading is suitability for the new Innovator Award program. Describe why the proposal is high risk, high reward, right? If you have everything figured out and it's low risk, that's not actually a good thing. There should be some risk in here, but you're going to want to explain to reviewers that you know what the risk is, you've identified it, right? And you have a plan to get around it. It's always important to have alternative plans and mitigation strategies. The next heading is statement of research effort commitment. You need to state very clearly there that you will commit at least 25% of research effort toward the project. Remember, that doesn't include your teaching time or your clinical duties if you have them. This is only the clinical or the research effort, and we'll talk more about that later. And then the last heading is bibliography or citations. So include critical citations. This goes toward rigor. You don't want to be too sparse with this. You can do this in an abbreviated format as long as the publication identifier is unique. I've also seen people put this in a somewhat smaller font. Do not go down to font size, 3 or something like that so that it can't be read on the computer screen. But you can probably do it a little bit smaller. Okay, the next slide. Point research strategy essay. We're still talking about the essay, and these are some points to consider. I'm going to talk about the research, the review process in a minute. So given the review process you're about to hear about, be sure that what you're writing can be easily appreciated by people well outside your scientific field. Make sure it can be appreciated for exceptional innovation and the potential for unusually broad impacts. Might be helpful to begin with a description of the scientific landscape of the field and a current state of the art or boundaries, the challenges that have come up. What's the problem in your field? You want to provide reviewers with the proper context for your proposal and why it is so innovative and potentially impactful. You want to ease the reader into the jargon of the field. If you write this for a specialist, I can tell you right now, it will be hard for reviewers to access. Don't do that. Do not laden it with jargon so much that somebody outside your field can't understand it from the first paragraph, all right? Although no data or detailed experimental plan are required, convince the reviewer that you've thought deeply about this project. Again, identify the risky aspects of it, how they'll be mitigated, and what the alternative approaches are that you will take. Also, convince the reviewer that the research will be performed in a robust and rigorous manner. Validate new approaches, provide estimates of numbers of human or animal subjects if you're using them, and why you're using those numbers. Indicate that sex will be considered as a biological variable, again, if that's appropriate. All of these things will go toward the reviewer's impression of the project. Okay, the next slide. Check out our website. We posted a screenshot here of, it's on the bottom of the website, New Innovator, Common Fund / New Innovator. And here you'll find an overview slideshow, which is similar to this, but a little shorter. You'll find the application and award guide, which has a lot of information in it. We take you step by step through the process. There's a whole set of FAQs. I guarantee you that your question is in those FAQs. Maybe not, but challenge me. Anyhow, go through them. They're divided up into different areas to be helpful. You can always send more questions in via, we're going to get to the questions in a bit here, but also you can send them later through email. This webinar will be up there in about a week. Right now, I think the old one is up there, but it's good to have the newer information just in case. There's a clinical trial button, and that's important. If you're planning on a clinical trial, you want to take a look at that because you're going to want to contact the right person to find out, to make sure that you're considering the appropriate variables. And then finally, if you'd like to sign up for our listserv, I know many of you are because I've told you to already, and that's why you're here, because you knew about this. But you can get information about funding opportunities and webinars and etc. that way. So the next slide. Now let's talk about the review process. This is a complicated review process. It's not the same as an R01, or if any of you have F awards, training awards, it's different, okay? So the new innovator review process from left to right here. First, the applications will be received at NIH. All the work that you're doing now is off this slide. It's off somewhere to the left of your computer screen. They're due on August 17th, 2026, right? So this is a little 2 days sooner than what the forecast document you saw published perhaps indicated. They're due August 17th. Don't turn them in late, please. So they all come in and they go through the Center for Scientific Review into the first level of review. It's a 2-phase review process, and I'm going to go through both phases. Phase 1 is made up of science area experts, sometimes called topic experts. There will be 3 times 3, that's what times 3 means, 3 assigned to every single application. They will provide preliminary comments and scores. Those individuals complete phase 1, and then phase 2 is an editorial panel that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, but they're going to use the comments from phase 1, those science area experts. Then there will be a subset selected. They will be reviewed and discussed in a common study section. So you don't need a study section based on your area of science. They're all reviewed together. And finally, that editorial panel will score the applications. This is a long process, phase 1 and phase 2, and it starts pretty much right away after the applications are received by the Center for Scientific Review in September. Maybe it takes a little while for them to get through the computer process, but they'll start in September and it doesn't end until April 2027. It takes this long because it's so complicated. The second level of review is not something you really need to worry about too much. We take care of all of this, and that is council approval. The council will approve or not the review, and that happens, we take care of that in May 2027. So let's dig in first to that phase one, the peer review process. So all the applications will be assigned to one of two or more, maybe sometimes there's three. This all depends on how many applications we receive. They'll be assigned to one of those equivalent panels. Again, they're not separated by science areas at this point. They're in a review branch in the Center for Scientific Review, or CSR. You'll get an email that says you're assigned to this review branch, and it may say, I don't know what it will say this year. It may say immunology, it may say cell biology. It may not match your area of science. Don't worry about this. All that means is that that is where the Scientific Review Office, or SRO, is the area of science where they generally work. But they reach out to people from all areas of science to identify those reviewers, okay? But I promise you some of you will ask me. That's okay. I'll answer you. Next, the administrative review will check for completeness of the application and ESI eligibility. And this is the point that if you have extra stuff in your application, it can be rejected. All right. Don't overstuff. Don't put things in that are either not required or not wanted. All right. When it says do not use, it means do not use it. Do not upload it. They'll also check for your ESI eligibility. I recommend everybody check your ERA Commons account. That is calculated based on information you put in about when you received your degree. If you're close and you need an extension, extensions are possible, but you better get on that right now. If your ESI eligibility ends before you submit the application, it won't be reviewed. So applications are grouped based on the areas of science as identified by the applicant, the group of, I think it's 8 areas of science. So potential conflicts of interest are considered for every application. For example, institutional conflicts. If you're at the University of wherever, no one from that university will be reviewing your application, for example. So not only institutional, but also collaborative, people that you've published with, collaborative conflicts. We don't want those people reviewing your application. And that's a lot of work. That's part of the work that the SRO will do. That's only a subset. Those are the two main areas of potential conflict of interest. So those science area experts, we call them MAIL, MAIL, male reviewers, will be recruited to cover all representative areas of science. Those individuals are recruited. They perform everything by, it's not really mail anymore. It's not even email. It's through a secure portal, but we still call them MAIL, male reviewers. They don't talk to each other. They don't form a mutual opinion of an application. They will give individual critiques. So on the next slide, continuing on phase one, this is just the same thing kind of sketched out graphically. So the scientific review officers recruit those science area reviewers, or MAIL, male reviewers. They'll match every application with 3 reviewers by the science area. Each application is reviewed by 3 separate reviewers. Those reviewers evaluate the applications. The evaluation criteria are spelled out in the funding opportunity, but they are: 1, importance and potential impact of the scientific problem. 2 is novelty or innovativeness of the approach. And 3 is you, the creative potential of the PI. Those reviewers give these 3 criteria a score, each one, and they write a detailed evaluation, a detailed critique of your proposal. Now, this slide is the same as the one I showed before in slide 15, and I just want to now focus on the first level of review, phase 2, okay? This is the editorial panel. That editorial panel will select the finalist applications for that phase 2. The applications are selected for phase 2 by the panelists. They're based on the rank score order from the phase 1 review for the male reviewers. They're selected, the finalists are selected by the editorial panel members based on that evaluation, the phase 1 scores and impact statements. So they look at numbers, they look at the reviews, and they pick this subset that will advance to the finalist stage. Depending on the number of applications we receive, it's almost always the exact same N that we discuss, but it's anywhere over the last few years from 13 to 20% of all the submitted applications will advance to phase 2 and will be discussed and receive a final score. The next slide. What happens is this editorial panel, so peer review process phase 2 continued, the review is conducted by this editorial panel of 15 or 20 members. They are senior members of the scientific community. They're experts with a very broad scientific understanding of what's needed out there for really high risk, high reward science. Each finalist application is assigned to 3 of these reviewers, the editorial panel reviewers. They have access to pretty detailed phase 1 critiques from the science experts, and all finalist applications are discussed. The scoring will focus on the impacts and innovation, and again, creative potential of you, the PI. Those 3 items are the same criteria that are reviewed again. If you take a look on our website at Archive, you go all the way over on the left-hand side and click on Archive. There's a huge panel that comes up the last almost 20 years of reviews of this award, and you can see examples of who those reviewers are. Not promising they'll be the same people, of course, but it gives you an example of their status and their areas of science. So you have to really think hard about the impact, the innovation, and also your audience, who you're writing for. Remember, you might be writing for a cell biologist, a neurobiologist, someone who does clinical trials, a genomicist, etc. That's your audience. Remember that when you're writing. That's why we say to avoid the jargon. Okay, the next slide. Following the review, all applicants will receive their scores. People are putting questions in the meeting chat. Can you please put them into the Q&A box, okay? So yeah, we're going to look at the question answer box for those afterwards. So stop putting them in the chat. Sorry. Okay, following the review, applicants will receive their scores within 3 to 5 business days in the ERA Commons. I'm pretty sure you get an email that will direct you to the link and you can click on it and get your score. For discussed applications, the finalists, a final score will be listed. You'll have the number. I'm going to remind you that even if you're in the top, whatever it is, 13 to 20% of applicants that made the finalist list, the editorial panel is instructed to spread their scores. They will give scores that go from 10, they have the full scale up to 90. They never go to 90, but they go into the 50s, 60s, maybe 70s, it depends. So they do spread them. Remember, you were still a finalist and you were in that top whatever percent. You'll get an email, you'll know what the percentile is. Okay, and you'll get your final score with that email. So for not discussed applications, no score will be listed. These are the non-finalists. It will say not discussed or ND on the ERA Commons. So all applicants will receive their summary statements approximately 30 days after the meeting. Sometimes it takes a little longer for New Innovator. There's a lot of you. This is incredibly complicated and it might take a little longer than 30 days. So be patient, you will get them. The discussed and scored applications will receive a resume or a summary of the editorial panel discussion and a statement of overall impact from each of the editorial panel reviewers and a score, right? And then the not discussed applicants receive very detailed critiques from the phase one reviewers. So if you're not discussed, you still get a lot of feedback, which I think is a really important thing. Okay, the next slide. We're almost done, folks. The advisory council review. This is the second stage of the review. Our Council of Councils from the Office of the Director, or OD, performs this second level of review. The review assesses the first level of review for fairness and uniformity in the application of the different review criteria. They are not tasked with reviewing the applications for scientific or technical merit. They don't go through your applications again. That council concurrence is needed to make the awards. We cannot move forward without the council approving this, but they will not evaluate the science or the scores or get to choose who gets funding. They review the review process. It's essential, but a lot of people think that council chooses applications, and that's not the case. Okay, so that wraps it up. I'm going to take questions and answers in a minute. Remember, put the questions in the Q&A box, okay? So again, there's a lot of information on our website, commonfund.nih.gov/new innovator. And after that, if you have more questions, you can email me, you'll get me, at newinnovatorawards@mail.nih.gov. This webinar, the recording, and the slides will be posted on the website. Slides may go up earlier, but the recording will go up in about a week. Okay. So now, Becky, my partner Becky Miller and I were going to transition to the, someone put another question in the chat. We're going to transition to the Q&As now. So please put your questions in the Q&A box so we can have them all in one place. So I think the way this is going to work is Becky's going to ask me questions and I'm going to answer them, right?
Yes. So I'm going to go through the Q&As and we're going to try to clump these as best we can into given topic areas so that hopefully it doesn't confuse people too much. So our first question, are PIs from R2 institutes eligible?
Yes, absolutely. As I stated earlier, if your institution is eligible and you have the appropriate NIH registrations, then yes, please apply. Yes.
All right. Is a tenure track faculty position required to apply? Are non-tenure track research faculty or staff scientists eligible?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, they are eligible to apply. If you're not tenure track, you can still apply. The key is that your institution must be willing to submit the application for you. Right. So that, and we take that as an indication that you're an independent researcher. The DP2 is essentially equivalent to an R01 with respect to that. And, your institution's not going to submit an application for an R01 if you're, for example, a student or a postdoc, right? So maybe if you're a very senior postdoc, but that's going to be a conversation between you and your department chair probably, or research mentor, I don't know. So you do not need to be on tenure track to apply. But you have to have the ability to submit an independent research grant, and that's determined by your institution. You don't need a letter that says, I'm a staff scientist, but I'm allowed to apply. If you apply, we will know you apply, because remember, even though it may be your grant, it's not really your grant. It's your institution's grant. The NIH gives awards to institutions, not to people, right?
Right. All right. If the PI has to leave the program, can a co-investigator take over?
So you're assuming that you received the award, I guess, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, so there are no co-investigators on these grants. So that would be a really hard one because one of the criteria for the grant is you, the PI. So if you're leaving science, my guess is that the award would be terminated probably. If you're moving from University of A to University of B, in theory, you can move the grant with you if University A agrees to relinquish it. Again, because it belongs to the university, not to you. So, but we don't have co-Is on these, so it's not an easy thing if somebody, like, say, moves overseas or something like that, because remember, you cannot apply if you're at a foreign institution. If you're moving to a foreign institution, you wouldn't be able to keep the grant. I hope that's enough detail on that.
Yes. And the follow-up question to that, are there any other transformative grant calls for non-ESIs?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. We have two other ones. On one of those early slides where I had four images across. The first one is called the Pioneer, and the third one is called the Transformative Research Award. So you can check those out on the website. I'm not going to go through it in great detail now because we don't have time, but we actually have a webinar for the Transformative Research Award, which allows multiple PIs, co-Is to apply. So you can have an MPI application there. I'll tell you that those have even more competitive success rates than the DP2, but yes, we have them open to non-ESIs.
All right. Other question. If awarded a DP2, do you lose your ESI status?
Oh, yes, yes. You say goodbye to that the minute you receive the notice of award. So you pop open the champagne and you lose your ESI status. That's really only, I mean, it's important, but it's the only time it creates a problem is if you have two things under review at the same time that both require ESI status. You cannot possibly receive both of them. Okay, so if that is your problem, that's a good problem to have, and we'll deal with it. We usually try to let people choose which one they would rather receive. Can't always promise to do that, but yeah, it's gone. And we say congratulations.
All right. Is this award applicable only for the scientists who have received their PhD in the past 10 years?
Yes, you need to have ESI status, and that is one of the criteria for ESI status is within 10 years, right? You also need to have not yet received a grant that would break your ESI status. So there's two parts that you need to consider there. If I forget something, Becky, just interrupt and fill it in for me, please.
Okay. Does your ESI status need to remain active after application submission, including during the review and to the award start date?
Well, yes and no. There are the two different criteria, the 10-year time clock. You only need to have that active when you apply, okay? So if your 10-year clock runs out sometime after August 17th, but before awards are made, that's okay. However, if you receive a large independent award, that breaks your ESI status. So half yes, half no.
Okay. Let's see. Does this grant allow co-investigators?
Nope, this is a single PI grant. You can have collaborators. I didn't talk too much about that. You cannot have a letter of support from those individuals. What you need to do is just talk about them in the essay. Say who they are, where they are. That's helpful so that CSR can eliminate them as potential reviewers. Because if they get it to review, that's going to be a problem. They'll probably recognize that they are in conflict and send it back, but that slows up everything. So you want to make sure that you clearly state who they are and what they will do. So you can have collaborators, not co-Is, and that's how you can deal with them in the application.
All right. So if you do have a collaborator, does receiving the DP2 affect their ESI status?
No, no, they will, they can receive some money from the award, but they're not a PI, so it doesn't matter.
And how do non-NIH awards like Foundation, NSF, or DOE funding affect my ESI status?
They do not. We're talking about NIH awards only. So you can have awards from anywhere else in the government or not, and that's great. But just NIH is what we're talking about here.
All right. And there's a follow-up about asking about the R2 institutions. So our primarily undergraduate institutions also, let's see, talk to me. So are also primarily undergraduate institutions, specifically research colleges and universities, also eligible, or does it need to be a doctorate granting institution?
So if they're eligible to apply for NIH support, that's fine. But what you need to be able to do is assure reviewers that you have all the resources to do the work. We don't allow a statement of equipment and all of that, but you'll want to state that you can accomplish this work at your institution. That should be fine. If you can't do the work there, that's a different story, but that's what they will evaluate during the review.
Let's see. So how does having an R01 under review or receiving an R01 during the DP2 review period affect my eligibility?
So if you receive the R01 during the review, your ESI status is broken, and it doesn't matter what your score is. You can have a perfect 10, and I cannot make a DP2 award to you. So if you receive a notice of award for any of those large independent grants, your ESI status is gone. And again, we say congratulations because that's the goal, is to get a grant. I don't want to ever discourage anybody from applying for multiple things. You have a limit of 6 a year, which I cannot imagine being much of a barrier. But yeah, if you receive a grant, then you can't receive the DP2. Was there two parts to that, Becky? Did I only answer one
No,
part?
there's one part.
Oh, okay, sorry.
All right. If I become a co-PI on an R01 during the review period, does that affect my eligibility?
So NIH doesn't actually use the phrase co-PI, but if you are one of a multi-PI, if you're one of the co-investigators on a multi-PI award, yes, that will break your ESI status. So I would tell you to be careful as you're considering those before you have your own grant. You might talk to your mentors about that approach, or you might ask not to be a PI, but instead to be key personnel. It's fine to be paid from somebody else's R01 as long as you're not one of the co-Is. That's fine. You wouldn't break ESI status, but if you're a co-I, then you do. So keep that in mind.
All right. Can you hold an R00 and a DP2 award at the same time?
Right. Well, the key is that you have enough available research effort, and it depends on how much research effort you put on the R00. It should be less than 75%. Actually, it should be well less, much less than 75%. I don't know what the averages are, but yeah, it's more of a problem when it's the K99 part of that award because that requires, I think, a higher percentage. But the R00 should be fine.
All right. How many times may I apply to the new Innovator Award?
As long as you're eligible, you can apply again next year. And if you've applied in the past, you can apply this year. I've had people, oh gosh, many people come in two, three, I don't know about four times. Oftentimes by then they have an award or they've lost their ESI status for some reason. So yes, please try again. You will get, if you're not discussed, you will get, as I said, very detailed critiques that should help you improve the application.
All right. Can I submit more than one DP2 application in the same cycle if the projects are scientifically distinct?
No, no, one per person, because remember, you are one of the most important review criterion, right? So no, you can only do one. Your university can have as many applications as they want. We're not limited that way, or institute, whatever, wherever you are, or college, but each person can only submit one.
This is similar. So can a DP2 and R01 applications be submitted at the same time, and can they include overlapping aims?
Oh no, that you cannot do. So you can't have two NIH applications under review at the same time that have scientific overlap. So if they have very similar overlapping aims, even only half overlapping, that's not allowed. I know that every year we will get a few people that will submit the exact same project for a DP2 and either an R35 or something else. And the AI assisted robots at CSR detect this very quickly. Myself and the other program officer will take a look at them and say, yes, indeed, these are overlapping. We'll reach out and you will be forced to choose one over the other. So don't do that, please. That's called overstuffing the system in a different way, and it's not allowed. That's the usual NIH policy. That's nothing special. That's how all your NIH applications will be from here on out.
All right. Here's a good one for this group. Can I submit a DP2 and a MIRA application in the same cycle?
Yes, you can, and that's where it's important that they not overlap scientifically. So yes, an NIH or an NIGMS MIRA, MIRA, or an R35 application can go in around the same time. I think their deadline is in October, around the same time as the DP2, and we often consider that when we're making final decisions. But yeah, just make sure they don't overlap scientifically.
All right. If an investigator has two conceptually distinct paradigm-shifting projects, one a theoretical engineering framework and the other a multi-site operational trial, are there any restrictions or strategic considerations regarding applying for a new innovative award and a transformative research award as a PI
Hmm.
in the same review cycle?
Hmm. Oh, that's a good one. Wow, you got some great ideas. I love it. Um, so you can apply to both. They cannot overlap scientifically. So don't have the same experiments in both of them, but although it doesn't sound like that's what you're talking about. So I think yes, you could do it. The key thing for the multi-site part, I will remind you that you cannot have a foreign site. That's the only issue with that one. Do you think that's it, Becky? I think
Yeah.
that's totally fine. Yeah.
Okay. Here's more specific about ESI, is an NCI R03, which is $150,000 for 2 years. Does that count as a substantial NIH award?
No, R03s do not. I do not know what the dollar cutoff is for large, right? But there is a list. If you go to the NIH ESI policies, Google that and you
I'll put it
come
in the
up.
chat too.
Oh, okay, good. And you come up with a site, there's a link that you go to, and it lists all the awards that you can get from NIH that do not break your ESI status. And I know that, so it's a list of the smaller grants, and I know that an R03 is on that. So an R03 does not break your ESI status.
All right. Let's see. Is it appropriate to propose work in a new research area that's outside my current expertise?
Hmm. You could do that. I think what you would need to do is convince reviewers that you have the resources and enough experience to be able to tackle the project. So, if it's a total 180 and you don't have any publications in that space, my guess is reviewers will have a problem with it. You can sometimes fill smaller experience gaps with collaborators, but it might be a little tricky if it's a really different new area. I would be slightly hesitant. I would try to see if I could publish maybe one paper in that area before applying. I could be wrong. It depends on the idea and the reviewers, but I have seen reviews come back say that they're concerned the PI doesn't have the appropriate experience to do the project. A change in research direction is not required for the DP2. It is required for a different one of our awards, but we're talking about that one right now. So I would be a little bit hesitant there, I think.
Right. How translational does the proposal have to be? For example, would a largely basic science proposal that has potential long-term disease applications be seriously considered, or are you looking for something with a direct disease focus?
So either of those examples would be considered. You know, it's fine if there's a disease focus and it's legitimate, it can really make an impact. That's totally fine. However, basic science is not only welcome, it's, we take everything in the NIH mission space, and we do not have a preference for one over the other. You have to think about how far-reaching the impact might be if your project is successful. So maybe think about that if you're trying to choose between the two projects. Which one is more high reward, assuming they're equal high risk. But we don't have any preference that it must have a disease focus, no. And that's one of the things that's unique here, because we're the Office of the Director. We don't have a specific, limited, focused scientific mission space. We take everything in the entire NIH mission, which is pretty broad.
Is there a point of contact we can reach out to discuss the scope and fit of a potential proposal? If so, is it appropriate to share a one-page specific aims page for feedback before submission?
So yes and no. So I'm the contact person, right? I'm the program officer for every single application that comes in. But as I said earlier, if you send me, first of all, a specific aims document is not required for this. So I don't know that I would waste your time writing one, because it's not going to be part of the application, but you might have it for some other reason. However, I promise you, I will tell you that if it's in the scientific mission of the NIH, it is within scope. Okay. Unfortunately, I cannot give you detailed scientific feedback on your project. I can have my own opinions, but those might not match the reviewers and might be misleading. So I don't usually share that too much with y'all. However, I'm happy to meet with people and talk to them. And what I'll ask you about is why is this new and different? What's innovative here? What's going to change if you do this project? How is this going to impact the scientific field or maybe even further afield? So no, I don't think you need to send me any written documents. And I don't need what you all might be told by your mentors to give the program officer an elevator pitch. That is true if you're submitting an R01 to an NIH institute or center, but it's really not needed for this award.
All right, and how often does NIH plan for a DP2 submission cycle each year?
Right, we do one per year, and we almost always have the due date sometime in mid-August. So only one.
All
You
right.
saw how complicated the review is. It takes a long time. That's why.
So this one is asking, does the DP2 have prioritized areas to fund? And are applicants encouraged to discuss potential topics with the program director ahead of time?
So I have the same answer that I answered, I think, 2 questions ago, right? We take everything within the NIH mission space. Of course, there are various NIH priorities, but that doesn't mean we're going to go through the list and only choose applications in that area. It could be if there are two that have the same score that we need to choose between, that could be something that would break a tie easily. But it's not something that would keep you from applying or, force you to apply, right? Was there a second part of that, Becky? I
Got
mean,
it.
and you don't need to talk to me about it again. It's the same answer. You can, but I doubt that I'll be able to help you that much.
All right. If funding decisions from a previous DP2 application cycle has not yet been released, am I still eligible to submit a new DP2 application for the current deadline?
So in other words, if you have your DP2 is still pending, right? If you received a score, but I haven't told you yes or no whether or not you will receive an award, absolutely you can still apply. Hopefully we'll have that information out before August 17th, but not always. Sometimes there are extra ones that are made at the end of the year. So if you do not know you are getting an award, absolutely apply again. We might ask you to withdraw if you get an application, and you'll probably be irritated with me for about 30 seconds since you'll be happy because I'm emailing you to tell you that you're getting an award, right? But that's okay. You can be irritated, but we will ask you to withdraw it so that we don't use reviewer time to review extra applications.
All right. So this is going back to overlapping aims. So my understanding is that having overlapping research directions for an R35 and another grant is allowed. But if I get one, I have to immediately withdraw the other when the former is awarded. Is this understanding correct, or would I need to withdraw whichever was submitted earlier when I submit the later one?
Oh boy. So the policy for the NIGMS R35 is that it can overlap, the application can overlap with an NIGMS R01, period, full stop. It cannot overlap with a NIH DP2. Okay, that is a NIGMS specific policy that applies only to applications to that institute. Okay, NIGMS is the National Institute for General Medical Sciences, right? So those are their policies, which are not the NIH-wide policies. So I don't remember all the bit about withdrawing, but basically you just cannot submit a DP2 that overlaps with anything else. That's just the normal NIH policy you need to follow. Okay?
All right. So can DP2 applications overlap with foundation awards?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's fine. However, well, wait a minute. With awards or applications, they can overlap with applications for foundation awards, but not with actual money that you have coming in, with awards you have coming in, right? So if you're funded to do part of the experiment somewhere else, don't put them into your DP2. Or if you receive funding, then you're going to receive the DP2. So say if you have, I don't know, maybe American Heart or ACS or whatever, and you just found out you got the money after you applied to the DP2, that's fine, don't worry about it. If you're going to get a DP2 award, you go through a process called just in time, where you tell us about your other support. And at that point, it'll become clear. You'll have to say, okay, aim one of the DP2 or project one in the DP2 has been funded by the American Heart. Then you're going to have a little bit of a problem. You might have to turn back the American Heart Award. It depends. We would talk through it and see what the overlap was and just figure that out. But if it's just an application, it's fine. It's only the NIH applications that cannot overlap.
Okay. And we have a lot of questions asking about clarifications about co-investigators. So just to double check, if an applicant is listed as a co-investigator on a pending NIH R01 proposal that has not yet been funded, would that affect their eligibility as an ESI?
No, it's only if that grant is funded, right? So if it's an application that's pending, that doesn't, I mean, it matters, but it doesn't affect your ESI. ESI is only broken if an award is made on which you are a investigator,
Yeah, so you
PI.
have to be a PI. So this is you listed as a
Yes,
PD or PI, even if it's multiple PD PIs on the
yes,
application. If you're on that
right,
R01, it's awarded, you lose your ESI status. However, if you're
period, yeah.
listed as a co-investigator, you're not listed
Oh,
as a PD or a PI,
I
then
said it wrong. You're right.
you
Yeah,
can be on
yeah.
that awarded grant and it would not
Right.
affect your ESI status. So
Yes, yes. You could
I
be
hope that
key
clarifies.
personnel. Yes, I'm sorry. I said it backwards, or I said it crooked, I think. But yeah, yeah, sorry about that. It's only if you're a PI.
Yes, so you need a PI. So, okay. Um, all right. All right, there are some questions. Let's see.
People are still putting questions in the
I
meeting
know.
chat,
Oh,
unfortunately. I
okay.
don't,
Yeah, some people are having trouble finding it. I apologize. Teams
okay.
is not the most intuitive system.
I
We'll try
couldn't
to get
find
to,
it for
yeah,
anybody. It's right above my head. You might have more with
more.
three dots. Click on that and see if that takes you to the Q&A. I couldn't find it either.
Okay. This is another kind of specific question about different applications under review. So regarding concurrent funding applications, if I submit both a DP2 application and later a CATS R01 application while the DP2 is under review, and both are ultimately selected for funding, would I be able to accept both awards?
No, that's a big fat no. And the reason for that is both of them require ESI status. So if the first one you receive, one has to be first, right? That will break your ESI status, and the other one could not be issued, period. Like our systems would not allow it. It would not go. So no. And that's the same thing if you have an R01 that depends on your ESI status. It doesn't have to be the CATS R01. It could be to any institute or center. But if you're getting an award because you're an ESI, the score might be a little bit not as high as if you were an established investigator. They'll reach for that. And yeah, you can't have both then.
All right. I'm starting as I will be starting as an assistant professor in November, but I'm currently a postdoc. Can I still apply for the DP2 of this August 17th?
So yes, you can. You need to have started independent research position by the time the award would be given. So that would be September 2027. Okay, so yes, you can. However, it's a little tricky. You're going to want your new institution to submit the award for you. It makes it a lot cleaner because likely your postdoc institution, you're probably not eligible for them to submit a large independent research grant. You might be able to, you could talk to them, but it's a lot cleaner if you can get the place where you're going to be doing the research to submit the application.
All right. Are DOs or MDs eligible for this award?
Sure, absolutely. It's a research award, so as long as you have a research track record that reviewers can evaluate, sure.
Regarding the 6 application limit, can you
Yeah.
clarify this? Does it mean 6 grants as a PI across different mechanisms? And does
Yes,
this include resubmissions?
yes,
Yes to all, yeah. So you need
yes.
to make sure you think it through, and it's a calendar year, right?
Yes, that's
Um,
important. Yeah,
so think about it in a calendar year and plan your submissions appropriately.
yeah. Because we're already more than halfway through. By August, we'll be way more than halfway through the year.
Yes. All right. So speaking more about the applications, are training of students and scientific outreach part of the evaluation? I'm assuming like the review process.
Um, it depends on what you mean. I don't exactly know what you mean by training of students. I think, yeah, you'll be training people, students, and all that in your lab to help do the research. Um, I think I need more information. I don't really understand that question. Do you get it?
Yeah, it's not this is a research grant, so
Right.
the focus and all your annual progress reports are all going to be focused on the achievements of that year based on your research progress. So while training is a really important component, really for your evaluation from the NIH view for a research project grant, it's more focused on what you've been able to accomplish in your research. Um, and it depends on the focus of what your research is. Maybe you're developing a training program for students. Well, then, of course, yes, that would be part of your
Yes, yes.
progress.
Okay.
But if you need more details, I think that's a very specific, it seems like you have something very
Yeah,
specific in mind. So maybe reach out to us at the Innovator Awards
yeah.
at mail.nih.gov. We can talk to you. Okay. Um, can you speak more about collaborators? What about PIs who might have industry partnerships?
That's fine. If you have a collaborator in industry, that's totally fine. Maybe you're getting access to specific technology or reagents from them. That's great. You just write about it in the essay. That's the limitation, right? We don't want letters of support from them. You cannot include them. You just write about it in the essay. Who is this person? What's their contribution? You know, you do list them in the PHS assignment form, and that's the place where you can list people that should not review your application, which I could talk more about in a minute. But the key for this is that it's a lot about you as the PI. So reviewers will need to know that even if you have collaborators, they're filling a specific niche, but you are the intellectual leader of the project. If they become concerned, the reviewers become concerned that you're not intellectually leading the project, that could be a problem. Like if you're doing something that seems like it's an offshoot of somebody else's lab, they won't like that. But you just state who they are, where they are, what their contribution will be. You might talk about how, if you've collaborated with them in the past, that's great. You can cite a paper that you've worked on before. If not, that's okay. But you might talk about, they're at the same university. They're down the hall. They're going to let me use their mass spec. I don't know. You can include whatever information you need to, but it only can go in the essay.
All right. And there's a couple questions asking about clarifying why we have that clinical trials contact page.
Mm-hmm.
Might need to describe what happens if an award's made.
Right, right. Well, it depends on what exactly the clinical trial is, right? And different institutes and centers have slightly different policies. So if you know where your project would live at the NIH, that will be helpful to be able to figure out who to talk to. So it's a very easy way to figure that out. You simply go to NIH Reporter, go down to the bottom, and there's a matchmaker tool. You put your abstract in there. Maybe you might need more than an abstract. I don't know, but an abstract maybe, a couple pages. I wouldn't put a whole essay in there, but the text in there, and they will tell you if you have something that's on neural circuitry of pain. It could be NINDS, it could be NIDCR, then they'll give you a few choices of institutes or centers. They'll also give you program officer information. But then what you could do is go back to our clinical trial list, go down the chart, find that institute or center, and it'll tell you who to talk to. I would do it sooner rather than later. If you do it the week before the application due date, you might have a problem. These can always be issued with a delayed start if we need to. However, that means a restricted award, so you don't actually get any money out until you have whatever you need, IRB approval in place before you can start. So make sure you look at that and talk to the correct individual. I mean, there's 27 institutes and centers, right? So we don't have all the policies at our fingertips right now, but those individuals are the experts. And we go through and update that every year. We double check and make sure they're still the right people to talk to.
Yeah, this is just to make sure that if an award is made, that you comply with the awarding institute or center's policies, because the office of
Yeah,
the director, we don't manage these awards. So other institutes will pick them up for us and administer them, and you have to comply with their rules, their regulations.
right.
That's why we ask you to contact them early, just to make sure you know what's up and that you follow their instructions.
Yeah, they can
I
only
put
be helpful.
I put the matchmaker link in the chat if you're interested.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's also really helpful. Anytime in your career, if you're trying to figure out if you have an R01 idea or an R21 idea, do those institutes and centers. Who handles them at those institutes and centers?
All right, so now we have some questions about kind of more defining high risk. So by definition, high risk research has a high probability of failure. How
Mhm.
explicitly should applicants discuss alternative strategies or pivot points in the essay without undermining confidence in their primary approach?
Well, I think you should be explicit. Where is the risk? What are you doing to mitigate it? So, what is special about your approach that you think it's the best one? And, even though the subject is high risk, that you think you have the best plan to mitigate that risk, right? And then what if this part doesn't work or that part doesn't work? What would you do? If there's an alternative, yeah, be explicit that, I've thought about this, and if I can't do it this way, I'll do it this way. What do you sacrifice if you do that alternative? That would be perhaps an important thing to include. But yeah, I think it's incredibly important that you identify the risk, talk about your plan to address it head on, and then move forward.
All right. Are preliminary data helpful to include even if not required?
I don't know that I've ever seen one of these issued an award without preliminary data. I've heard rumors that that's true, but I've never seen it. So it's rare that somebody comes in without any preliminary data. Of course, it could be useful. And that is, I didn't say it to the last question, but that is one of the ways you can increase the reviewer's confidence that you will be able to overcome the high risk. I don't know, say if you're planning a screen that maybe is a high risk, you can state, this is how we're going to get around it. We've done some pilots on this aspect of it, and we do have some results here. So yeah, it can be used strategically to address specific issues around risk. I think what you do not want to do is fill the application with preliminary data such that it really reads like it's an R01. Reviewers rarely, if ever, I think they're instructed not to say this, but once in a while you'll see that, well, this application could be a standard R01. And that's usually, frankly, that's the kiss of death. So for the DP2, it means it might be fine for an R01, and you may not think you have enough preliminary data, but the reviewers sure might. So there's a balance point. Don't put in I'm not telling you to withhold data, but do not fill this full of preliminary data, especially when it's on pretty straightforward things that, are kind of routine or that you published on previously. Yeah.
Okay, and then another question swinging the other way. If you don't have any preliminary data, what are some
Okay.
successful ways to demonstrate the scientific premise and your
Yep.
capability of executing the project without relying on traditional pilot data?
Yeah, that's absolutely, that's a great question. I would say that you can take examples from the literature. Um, that's probably the best way if you have absolutely nothing from your lab yet. If you've surmounted other really challenging projects in the past, you talk about that in, I forget the heading, but one of the sections where you're talking about yourself as the person that's applying and how, you've overcome some high risk projects in the past. And you don't want to sound arrogant, but you do want to sound confident that you've done other things that you don't have a huge track record in and you don't have preliminary data for, but you think that this plan will get you there. Um, and if you get the award and you're my one example of somebody, I'm going to be super happy. So, yeah.
All right, and getting to some more recent, um, is sex still a triggering word for reviewers? And many words and phrases have become recently. So are there triggering
Well,
words? Yeah.
yeah. So sex is not one of those. I think what you might be referring to is gender. You'd probably depending on what the science is, you might not want to use the word gender. We don't usually talk about genders of mice, for example. So I'd be careful there. Uh, there are no banned words, BANNED, not BAND. There are no banned words at NIH. You can use any words you want to use. However, I would tell you to be sure that you're looking at NIH priorities overall and making sure that you're not submitting something that is no longer or not an NIH priority. But is no such thing. I mean, there probably are words that would make a program look at your application twice, but I doubt that reviewers are going to have those opinions. I don't know. Is that what the question was, do you think?
Yeah, I think many institutions have their own methods for kind of
Mm-hmm.
pre-screening
Yep.
information that
Yep.
they submit to NIH. And I would strongly encourage you to use those resources that are available to you,
True.
to make sure that that you are avoiding the use of potentially triggering words. I would say that they're not triggering for the reviewers
Right.
it's coming at a higher level that we do not have any control over either. So I
And it could
just
change. That
and
could
it can
change.
change. Yeah,
Yes.
it's constantly
Yeah.
changing as we're discovering. So
Yes.
I would encourage you to use those resources, and I would encourage you that in all your communications to NIH going forward, that you are
Yep.
careful with the words that you use. So whether it's an RPP, a research progress report,
Yep.
whether it's an application, I would just say err on the side of caution and just make sure that you screen your material carefully. And I would avoid any words that may be triggering to the administration. So that's what we'll say there. All right. Is there a window in which one can update, I guess, their application with recent publications or
Uh,
papers after submission?
Yeah, what you're talking about, we call post-submission materials. And unfortunately, because of how long and complicated the review for the DP2 is, we don't allow that. As you might imagine, there are multiple different reviewers at different stages that are looking at your applications, and the SROs are only humans. So no, you can't send in updates about a paper that was accepted or anything like that. Whatever you submitting on August 17th is your full application. It'll be different if and when you're submitting for like an R01. They do allow post-submission materials.
Okay. Will a detailed budget be asked for any time during the review period?
No, absolutely not. No detailed budget during the review period. Um, it is possible, it's likely you will get if an award is to be made in the just-in-time process, you may have to submit a detailed budget. So that's why when I mentioned that, your institution might require it, that's fine, do it, right? But don't submit it. But you have it there for the following summer when perhaps an award is to be made because you might need that then.
Okay. Can you recommend or exclude scientific reviewers?
You cannot recommend any. You can ask for reviewers to be excluded. That is in that PHS assignment form, the same place where you put collaborators, for example, because you're writing the collaborators there because they should be excluded as reviewers. NIH has access to that information. The scientific review officer, the SRO, will consider it. They do not need to follow it. So again, look over the list on our archive of how long the list of especially the mail-in reviewers are. And there's hundreds and hundreds of people that help out with this every year. So odds are not huge that one of your people that you're going to mention would get it. But yes, you can say you don't want Dr. Patricia Lewosky to review it or whomever you want to list, but you have to say why.
And note that the scientific review officer is under no obligation to
Yes, yes.
abide by it. It's just a
Yeah, they
suggestion.
they have access to it, they can read it, but it doesn't mean they're gonna do it. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Is there any restriction for using the DP2 grant money to support international collaboration? For example, paying for data access fees of a foreign data set, like the UK Biobank, and publication fees with co-authors overseas.
Yeah, that's a very good question. At this point, yes, you are restricted, and we do not allow the award dollars to be given to a foreign institution. So right now, yes. Um, yes, you're restricted. No, you cannot use those dollars that way.
All right. Are there successful NIH DP2 applications from the last 5 years available? The website only has
Mm.
applications through the 2021 cycle.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, that's what we have. I thought we had a few more up there, but I think they didn't transition or something. I can't remember. But no, what we have on our website is what we have. And really, they're not there to give you an idea of what kind of science. They're there sort of to show you what an essay looks like versus, an R01, perhaps research strategy, which is a little bit different. It doesn't mean that it's a formula. It doesn't mean you need to follow exactly the way those individuals formatted their applications, but they're examples. Right now they're there. I don't know for how much longer they will be. So my best advice is to talk to people at your institution that perhaps have this award and see if they will share their applications. We can't do that for you.
Yeah, it's very difficult for us to get our hands on them. Just
Yes, and
yes.
they have to be redacted and so on and so forth. So it's a lot. So we don't
Yeah.
have many. Sorry.
All right. Is it possible to include an equipment supplement in the DP2 application?
Well, it's possible to include equipment on your budget if you decide you want to buy equipment with the grant money. It doesn't mean we're not really entertaining supplements for an additional amount of money. The 475K hopefully would be fine for almost anything you'd want. Uh, but yeah, if it is, you need to declare that early, because those monies actually have a different indirect rate. But that information is in the funding opportunity in more detail.
All right. Is it appropriate to refer to other current NIH-wide plans beyond what is listed on the RFA website, which strongly encourages applicants to refer to the NIH director's statements of priorities? So this is advancing NIH's mission through a unified strategy.
Um, I don't understand the question though. I mean, I suppose you could refer to it, but um, to what end, right? You can mention, I suppose, that what you're talking about is within the interests stated on that website, but you cannot put a website into an application, so don't do that. That's called overstuffing, and your whole application can be rejected for that, so don't do that. Um, do you think that's what that means, Becky? I'm a little stymied by that one.
I I I don't I would not use my 10 pages
Yeah,
to
yeah.
to
Talk
to
about
talk
priorities.
about
Yeah,
administration priorities. That's something that later on, like the program officers often have to justify. Um, and as long as it's relevant to the NIH mission, it will be justifiable. So I personally would not use that limited space
yeah,
to
yeah,
address that personally.
yeah.
Okay, a
You know,
question about the
some
oh,
somebody just put a very interesting link. I'm not going to click on, but you guys might be interested, but it is in the chat. Someone added, Ellen, thank you for that, a new PI Slack channel that they say is a very good resource in part for DP2 past, present, and future awardees. You must apply for membership. I'm not doing it. I'm not a new PI, but I would think that that might be of interest to many of you. Yeah, sorry, Becky, I interrupted you.
oh, okay. We have some review questions. So do you get a score similar to other mechanisms, and when would you get that score?
Well, the score range is similar. It goes from 1 to 9. Okay, so 1 being the best and 9 being the opposite. So, but I don't know what you mean by in the same range. I think the editorial panel is supposed to use the whole range of scores. Again, they're not going to go up to a 90, but they will go 60s, 70s, etc. So, in that case, they are similar. So you will only get a score like that, or a score, if you make it to the finalist stage. So if you don't make it to the finalist stage, instead, you get really, I think, very good critiques from what are called the mail-in reviewers, right? But they will not have scores associated with them anymore that you will see. I don't get to see them either. So, yeah.
Right. So defining high risk, how do the review panels distinguish between a project that is appropriately high risk versus one that's viewed as simply unfeasible or lacking sufficient scientific grounding?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. I mean, it's your job to convince them that it's feasible. I mean, you know, there are limits, of course, to what they're going to believe, and it's your job to convince them. So if they think it's really not feasible, they will let you know. One of my best, I think, pieces of advice is to have some people read your essay. And by that, I don't just mean, your best buddy in your scientific area who would be super, well, they might be competitive, but super fired up about the idea and understand every little variable. Have somebody that's outside your area. If you're deep into cell biology, have a neuroscientist read it. Somebody that, you know well and you trust their scientific opinions, but is outside your area. Does this sound feasible or not to you? And if you have questions about whether or not this is feasible, you better talk about them in the essay, because the last thing you want is for the reviewer to say this is not feasible when you think it is. So again, that would be a good place for a little preliminary data if you have it. But there's many ways to talk about alternative plans, and maybe your plan B or plan C won't get you all the way to where you want to be, but then you'll get halfway to the high risk goal. That might be still really important and really impactful. I don't know. It's up to you, but you'll need to discuss that in the essay. It's a hard
Okay.
one. It's a hard
Yeah,
call because those reviewers are individuals and they're going to have their individual opinions.
absolutely. All right, is the current and pending, well, before we go, we realize we're over time. This webinar always runs over, so we're fine sticking around for longer. If you guys have to jump, you have our email address. Feel free to reach out to us and we can answer things offline, but we can stick around longer if you guys want to. So we'll keep going unless the ticker drops down to zero, but um, still have a good group. So another question, is the current and pending support document required?
I,
Um,
I'm
yes,
blanking. It is required, isn't it? Yeah.
it is required.
Other
Um,
support, other support.
yes, the
Yeah.
OS document. We
Yes.
used to collect it as just in time, but I don't know if they changed that recently. I know it will be required as just in time, should an award
Oh,
be
for
made,
sure.
like an updated
Absolutely.
version.
Yeah.
And I think they're now requiring it for applications too. Refer to the
Okay.
SF424 guide for the
Yeah.
latest information. There's been a lot of changes. It's hard
Changes.
for
Yeah.
us to keep it all
Yeah.
straight sometimes too. All right, given that detailed itemized budgets are not submitted for the Pioneer or new Innovator, how should applicants best describe their resource needs and planned expenditures within the narrative to reassure reviewers that the project is appropriately scaled?
Well, there's a lot of ways. I mean, these are experienced reviewers. They're going to be able to tell if you're talking about work that it would involve, like, 20 people, 10 years to do. They're going to know that. You don't need a budget to figure that out. I think if you have a very clear plan, reviewers will be able to assess that. I will say that oftentimes I see reviews that they say this person is they're biting off way too much. They don't know how much work this is. This is about 3 grants worth of a project. So really have somebody experienced look at it for you, because that is important. If you propose too much, that is not one of the ways to have an application be risky, okay? That you can't possibly do it because it's too much work. That's, say if you're going to make, like, I don't know, multiple generations of different designer mice, or I don't know, something like that, that just logistically takes longer than the amount of time you could possibly do. That's not going to fly. You might think about a timeline if not in your application, have a timeline in your head, on your whiteboard, behind you, whatever. But oftentimes when you put projects down in a timeline like that, you start to realize how long they will actually take. And I think it's very important for reviewers to appreciate that you've thought it through that deeply and that you really do have a plan, that you're not just, putting out there, that you've really have a really serious plan for it. So that's one way to deal with it. The other thing is if you know what you're doing, you know how long it will take, right? So you can also say, from my experience, it takes X amount of time to do whatever set of experiments you're talking about doing. If you're crystallizing things or something, how long does it really take, right? Um, so consider that, I guess.
Okay. Since no extensive experimental plans or preliminary data are provided in a 10-page essay, what counts as extensive? For example, would inclusion of mathematical equations be permissible or recommended as part of preliminary data or rationale, or should the essay be strictly high level?
Right. Well, my advice is to keep it high enough level that the reviewers understand what you're going to want to do without slipping into jargon where you're going to lose some half of the reviewers. If you're going to lose half of the reviewers, that's really not in your best interest, right? I mean, of course you can put mathematical equations in there if they make sense and if they matter for the content of the science, but they need to be accessible to a broader scientific audience, okay? So that's kind of the dividing line, is if you're filling it chock full of details that you know, are going to lose people or that could be skimmed over if the person doesn't need to dig down in those details. That's not a good use of your space, right? So you only have 10 pages. So I'd be careful with that. Of course, you can have math if it makes sense to have math. I've seen lots of these with mathematical equations in them. But you don't need to have, I don't know, things like the lot number of the antibody for your Western blots and, things like that, or proof that a Western blot works when it's something that's been published in the past. I think anything that's been published, you absolutely I would think you don't need to have a lot of detail on. Um, I don't know. What else do you think, Becky?
No, I think it's good. Covered a lot of it. So
Yeah.
we still have quite a few questions, so I'm kind of plowing through.
I'm getting
Um,
tired, you guys. No, it's fine. We'll keep going.
okay. For phase one review, how are reviewers reminded this is a high risk, high reward mechanism? Reviewers
Okay.
often acknowledge a proposal is highly innovative, but still criticize it as being too risky. So, what are the
Right.
consideration that applicants will not receive criterion scores or phase one scores? Oh, that's a separate question. So let's just do the first part where
Okay.
reviewers and
Yeah.
high risk.
Right. Right. So, um, why don't you take that one, Becky? I'm trying
So
to
each,
think.
so we do ask you to put in your essay, just put in there, hey, there's no preliminary data because it's not required for
Yeah.
this high risk mechanism. But for each of during our reviews, we actually train our reviewers. So they go, they have a special presentation where we talk about this initiative and what we're trying to achieve. And we remind them we're looking for risky research, but it still, of course, needs to be feasible. So they are trained.
Yeah.
And they know what this is about, and the chair of this study panel will be good. Like they're always um, good at prompting or reminding the reviewers if they tend to go towards more of that traditional R01 mindset. They'll get nudges and pokes, and if the chair doesn't remind them, the scientific review officers are often good about reminding them too. So there are multiple people paying
Right.
attention and reminding reviewers what this is trying to achieve.
But that's for the editorial panel. That's where I was getting my brain kind of hung up.
Oh,
So the
true.
editorial panel will be all together talking. And if a reviewer goes off on a tangent like that, they will be pulled back in by the group. The question I was focused on, you answered by talking about the training. Every single NIH reviewer goes through a fairly extensive, sort of a generic CSR training about I don't know, bias and how things should be reviewed and all that, but special for this, and a lot of those are sort of online trainings, but special for all the HR initiatives. Our SROs lead every single one of those hundreds of mail-in reviewers through a training about how this is different. But Becky's absolutely right. You want to gently remind reviewers that this is not supposed to have a detailed experimental plan. You can remind them gently about, this is an HRH, high risk, high reward initiative, and this is what the risk is. And this is what the reward is. You don't have to spell it out quite that clearly. You don't want to be spoon feeding reviewers, but this should not be written like an R01. You can take a few sentences to remind them about how it's different. I've seen that in many of the essays, and reviewers will make their own opinions. They always do, but sometimes that gentle reminder is a good thing.
Then the second part of this, what are the considerations that applicants will not receive criterion scores or phase 1 scores? But they do.
Right. No, they don't. So you don't get your phase
the
1
scores. Yeah.
You don't get your phase 1
Yeah.
scores. You get the phase 1 critiques. There used to be, or there will be phase 1 scores associated with those phase 1 critiques. However, the SRO will strip them out if you are not discussed and you get only the critiques. Why? I want my numbers, right? Well, actually, they do that for a very good reason. And the reason is that you are in somewhere, let's pretend that 20% of applications are discussed, okay? You're in the bottom 80%. It doesn't, if you're not discussed, it does not matter where you are in that 80%, right? They're all essentially equivalent. Awards will not be made. It doesn't matter where you are in that list. It matters to you, but it doesn't matter in the large picture. And the issue is that you might get, I don't know, 3s or 4s, something like that, or 30s or 40s for the criterion scores. And the people that are discussed, their scores are going to range from 10 up to, I'll make it up, let's say the highest score is 70. I can't tell you what it'll be, but it could go for sure into the 60s. So your neighbor next door submitted one, they were discussed and they got a 50. They're really depressed. And then you get your scores, your criterion scores were 3s. You're like, wait a minute, why wasn't I discussed? My neighbor was discussed, but got a 50. That doesn't make sense. And then, so then you email me or the SRO and, you're pulling out your hair because there was a mistake made. There was not a mistake made. The criterion scores that get somebody into the discussion round are usually all 1s and 2s. Sometimes a 2 or a 3, it depends, or there might be 1, 1, 3, right? They're all incredibly good. So your phase 1 criterion scores cannot be compared to the final scores. And we have found through the years that confuses applicants, and it's just not good. So that's why the SROs made the decision to strip out those numbers. Sorry, that was long-winded, but it was a very complicated decision, and that's why they did it.
Okay. What are the common reasons for not discussed, even if they follow all the standard guidelines?
So it might be that the reviewers find it really not all that innovative. It doesn't seem like it's all that new and different. The person has done projects like this in the past before, but they don't see anything bold or creative about the proposal, for instance. It could be that it should be an R01, right? It could be scientifically flawed. Maybe the reviewers do not believe either it could be done or that it should be done, right? So there's a lot of different reasons why it might not be discussed.
All right, to emphasize rigor, should we lay out exact statistical tests that will be used in power analyses like we do for other grants? If so, how do we suggest that how do you suggest we do that since we will not be giving a detailed experimental plan?
Right. Well, again, you have to fit everything in the 10 pages if it's going to be in your essay, right? So you have to be sparing with which details you might want to include. Part of rigor is also presenting the background in the scientific area that you take into consideration, not just your work from the past, but also maybe competitors, or there's different camps in different areas. So you have to present things equally. That's part of rigor. So for the power analysis, say if you're talking about how many human participants or human subjects you might need for a study, or mice, how many mice you think you're going to use. I don't know that I would include all the gory details about the power analysis, but it depends. If you're requesting a huge amount, then maybe you would want to put it in, right? If you're only requesting like 5 mice, I think reviewers might say something like, what are they talking about? What can you do with 5 mice? So where it makes sense, you should include the details. I know that's kind of a cop out, and it's a little bit fuzzy, but you have to weigh the 10 pages and what you can put in there that's going to make your best case that this is a project that fits in the initiative.
All right. Along the same veins, can you speak a bit more about preliminary data, expectations from reviewers, and are there specific aspects of the project description where preliminary data should be included, such as in feasibility, investigator qualifications, etc.?
I mean, I I feel like I've said everything I could say about preliminary data. If it makes sense and it helps make the argument for feasibility, then it might be worth putting in. But if you fill it up, you will be told this feels like an R01. This should be an R01. If you've already completed half the project and you have everything, all lined up, that could be a negative for you.
All right, and can you propose methods or experiments which use experimental facilities or experimental data of your colleagues?
Um, sure. If your colleagues are okay with it. I mean, you might be listing them as a collaborator, but again, the reviewers have to appreciate that you're the intellectual driver. So I think that's a big fat it depends.
How many pages are appropriate for each section of the research essay?
As many as it takes. I mean, the long part, of course, is explaining the whole project, right? Again, you can look at some of the samples on the website. It should be pretty obvious that some of these things can be shorter than others. Like you wouldn't write about yourself and your creativity for 7 pages out of 10, for example, but you will want to talk about what you've done in the past and why you're the right candidate for the award. So I'm not going to give you a page number, but let's just say it shouldn't be 7. You have to find the right balance for what you need to talk about in the essay.
All right. Um, you mentioned that we cannot have a proposal already funded by a foundation. What
No, that's
if,
not what I said.
what if a private foundation with a small grant is funding the beginning of the project, but it's not providing enough funds for the entire project? Should we explain that part is already being funded and what part we will need NIH funding to complete the project?
I see. So if you have some funding, some seed funding, a pilot grant or whatever, you can talk about this aim is supported elsewhere. It will generate preliminary data or something like that. But you don't include it as one of the parts of the grant, right? I mean, of the new Innovator application. you're doing this screen, let's say, for American Heart Association, and you're doing it in a model organism, and you've laid out the screen, and that's going to be paid for by another source. It's kind of the same, you have startup money for things as well, right? It's sort of the same way. If things are already paid for, you don't want to misrepresent them as an experiment you were doing. Who would you give credit to? The funding credit once that experiment is complete and you have that data in your hand. Who funded that, right? So you can say, some seed funding is supporting the preliminary data that I have here, for example. But I've never seen somebody write in a grant, but I need more money to do a larger scale screen. I don't know, I'm making this up, but I would just be careful that the experiments you're proposing that you want to do with the new innovator money, if you get it, would be separate from what is already funded anywhere else. That's all.
All right, then we have another repeat question asking about, do you have to maintain ESI status?
Yes.
Yes, you do. It may expire while the review is going on or pending the DP2 award. However, you cannot receive a substantial NIH award before the DP2 award is made. If you get like an R01, for instance, before the
You're
DP2 is
done.
issued, then you're no longer eligible.
Right.
And may you apply for an R01 during the DP2 award period? Yes, it
Yes,
cannot be overlapping scientific aims, though.
exactly. Perfect.
Yeah, and another question, will reviewers see the vertebrate animal section?
Yes, of
Yes,
course they will.
they will.
Yeah, they can see all the different sections of the application, and they will look at it. Trust me, they will look at it.
Yes, they do. All right, those are the questions from the Q&A box. So I think we might be done
Well, there's a few in the other one
in the chat.
in the chat. Let's see. Should we be submitting a resource sharing plan as part of the application, or is it not permitted prior to a JNT? It's not required. The resource sharing plan is not required unless you're asked for a just in time. So you don't have to put it in there. Clinical trial, we already talked about that one. Recommending or excluding scientific reviewers, I think we handled that. Can I apply from a biotech startup? Certainly. If your startup company has the appropriate registrations with NIH, and make sure they've done that, because it's not a simple procedure. They can't do it at the last minute. Then you can apply. Okay, there's the COI question that I confused earlier. Here, if the proposal includes two parallel studies, one human cohort, one cell culture-based experiment, how would you prioritize a scientific area as the primary? And that's when I remind you that we're not actually allowed to tell you which science area to choose, but it's really up to you. Which one you think would you want reviewers to be primary and secondary? And I don't know whether the primary area would dictate two reviewers versus the secondary one. I don't know. I think that's up to the SRO and how they handle things, but I would probably try to include both, and I don't think it matters which order that much. Could you help applicants understand if the goals of the aims are aligned with the goals of DP2 during a one-on-one meeting? As I said, I'm happy to meet with you and talk to you about, what here is innovative and why do you think this is bold? Why is this not an R01? And if the reason you say it's not an R01 is just because I don't have the preliminary data, that's not a good reason. So it has to be really bold and creative, and it's up to you to articulate why. So usually when I meet with people one-on-one, we can talk through that, but it's me helping you think about it more. I'm not going to give you any insight that you can't, that you probably don't already have. But that's okay. If you really want to, we can try to set up meetings. I don't know if I'm gonna have time to meet with y'all before August 17th, but we'll see. I don't
right.
see
I think
anything
that's it.
else.
All
Recording
right.
is stopping in 2 minutes. Okay.
Well, I think we made it in time then.
Okay. Well,
Next
thanks
year we
everybody
just
for
schedule.
hanging on.
Yeah. Let's just schedule 2 hours next time.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.